So today we are going to talk about market research for public transit, and we are specifically going to talk about passenger research because market research is a big topic and probably more than I could cover in its entirety in an hour. But the kind of market research that is probably most critical to transit agencies is understanding our passengers, understanding how they use our systems, how it works for them, all of that. So that's what we're going to focus on today, and some tools for understanding our riders. Now, this is, as Liz said, number 5 in a series of 6 classes. We've worked our way through awareness and websites and passenger information and community-based marketing. So we are now down at the bottom of our little hierarchy of effects that we've been talking about all along. We said that you have to take people through a series of conditions and bringing them to be regular riders. And now we're down at that part where we're trying to hold on to those riders. Once they've tried our service and they've started using it, we want them to be with us for a very long time and to ride day in, day out. So this is about retention and building regular ridership. But as you will see as I go along, understanding our riders can also be a critical part of attracting new riders, because the riders that are the easiest to attract to transit are those that are not too different than the riders we already have. They have similar needs, they have similar characteristics. There's a lot more of them out there in the community. So understanding our riders and how they're using our system can help us attract new riders as well. So I kind of began to get into it there, but why conduct passenger research? Why should we do this at all? Well, there's, many of you might say, because my boss told me to, he or she said, we need a passenger survey. And that is one reason, but probably the better reason is simply to understand your riders. We have riders out there, we look at the numbers every month, but who really are those people that are using our system? And we need to understand not just who they are, but how they're using our system. Are they riding every day? Are they only riding occasionally? Are they using a lot of services or one specific service? How are they using our system? And the reason that we need to know these things is to guide our service development decisions and enhancements. If we want to continue to make our service better, we want to make it more attractive to people, we want to attract more riders, then we need to understand what we're doing well and what we could do better. We also need to figure out how to best allocate our limited resources, because we all only have so much money to spend on service. So if we have a little extra money and we say, well, we could extend service an hour later at night, or maybe we could run a little more often on the weekends, which of that would serve our passengers better? Well, who better to ask than our passengers to understand that decision? We also need to understand how our passengers get information so that we can make decisions about how to deliver that information in ways that'll make the system easier to use. Because we all know one of the reasons people don't use transit is because it's confusing or scary. How can we overcome that? We need to understand what is confusing or scary so that we can do it. And then finally, we need to explore rider motivations. We need to understand why they're riding, both to retain them as riders and, as I said before, to attract more riders that are like them. So those are some of the reasons that we conduct passenger research. So what kind of research do we have to choose from? There's some different ways that we can go about it. And you may have heard these terms before, or they may, just be terms that always confuse you. But we have quantitative methods and we have qualitative methods. Quantitative basically means survey research. It means conducting surveys. And those in transit are going to include onboard surveys where we're catching our riders while they're using our service. It might include online surveys, driving them to our website or to an online platform to take a survey. It might include surveying them by phone, but it means asking specific questions in a survey format. Qualitative research, on the other hand, involves talking to people, having in-depth discussions with them in formats like focus groups and informal interviews, which could be conducted on the bus or at the transit center or in a variety of ways. So quantitative research, what are the characteristics of quantitative survey research? First of all, it means talking to a relatively large number of respondents that represent some population. In our case, the people that ride our bus. It means using a defined questionnaire, asking the same questions of every respondent, and mostly close-ended questions, questions that they can simply select from a series of answers, rather than questions that require them to write out or speak an answer. We want defined questions so that we can analyze the data easily. And survey data means that it can be analyzed to understand how a population thinks or behaves, or how subgroups within the population compare. So when we conduct a survey, we want to be able to say things like 25% of our riders are under 30 years old, or 50% of our riders pay their fare with a prepaid pass. We want to be able to say things like that as a result of a survey. That's what a survey lets us do. Qualitative research, on the other hand, things like focus groups and in-person interviews or personal interviews, they involve talking to much smaller numbers of participants, where a survey might involve 100 or 200 or 1,000 bus riders. A focus group might involve 8 or 10, a small number of participants, but that reflect a cross-section of a population you're interested in. So some older, some younger, some men, some women, some workers, some non-workers, whatever. You want to reflect that cross-section. A focus group involves an in-depth discussion of specific issues that are relevant to a group and that you want to know more about. Generally, for a focus group, you develop a discussion outline to guide the discussion, but that discussion outline can vary as you go along, as you find out what's important to the people in the group. That's the real value of qualitative research, is that it is great for finding out things that maybe you didn't even know to ask about. Focus groups and these sorts of interviews, qualitative interviews, can be conducted in person or remotely. They are not necessarily representative of the population, depending on how you selected the people. I mean, 8 people are not going to tell you everything about your ridership, but they can give you some really good insights. And as I said, they can be conducted remotely as well as in person. And during the pandemic, I've done a whole lot of focus groups online. And early on, I had real trepidation about doing that. I thought, oh my heavens, we're going to have all these technical difficulties. Riders aren't going to be able to figure it out. The fact is, everybody has become Zoom literate. They all have a phone in their hand all the time. And conducting focus groups remotely has become a whole lot easier than I ever expected it to be. So we'll come back to all of that in a bit, but that's just to give you a quick overview of what quantitative and qualitative research means. Now, when you go about conducting a passenger survey, there are going to be a series of steps you need to go through. Just like any other thing, there are tasks. And they begin with determining what your objectives are. What is it you want to accomplish with this survey beyond making your boss happy because she asked you to conduct a survey? What specifically do you want to learn? And how are you going to use what you learn? The second thing, based on that objective, is who do you need to talk to? What is the population that you want to survey? Is it all of your riders, or is it some subset of your riders? And then the third thing is, what method is going to work best? Is a survey going to work best? If so, is it an onboard, an online, or a phone survey? Or is a qualitative research going to work best? Maybe a focus group so that you can really explore some issues. Once you've made that decision about method, then you can begin to think about things like questionnaire or discussion outline, how you're going to recruit people to the focus groups, or how you're going to select your sample for the survey, how you're going to go about conducting the research, and then finally, how are you going to analyze the data and interpret the findings. So we are going to walk through all of these today, and we're going to start with these first 3 because they are very closely related. These are the 3 steps you go through to figure out what you're going to do before you ever begin to do anything. So first of all, objectives. What do you want to learn about your riders? And this is closely related to the second column over here, which is how do you plan to use the findings? Because you need to know what you're going to do with it in order to know what you want to learn. The kinds of things that you can learn in a survey about passengers is, who are they demographically? What is their age? What is their income level? Are they students? Are they employed? What's the breakdown of men and women? What language do they speak at home? All of those can be really useful pieces of information. Second thing is, how and why do they use transit? Do they use it because they don't have a vehicle available? Do they use it because they're a one-car household and maybe somebody else sometimes uses the car and they use transit for that reason? Do they use it because it's the easiest way to commute back and forth to school or work or wherever they go? Why do they use transit, and how do they use it? Do they ride every day? Do they ride once a week? Are they just occasional riders? When they do ride, do they use a single route all the time? Do they use multiple routes? Do they transfer? So there are a lot of bits to know about how they're using the system and what their travel needs and characteristics are. So for what trip purposes are they riding? Are they riding to medical appointments, to school or work? Are they using you to go grocery shopping? Those things are going to impact the types of service decisions you want to make. How do they get information? We talked about this earlier. Are they using your website for information? Are they using a phone app? Are they still using printed guides? Do they simply go to the bus stop and look at the sign that's there to see what time the bus is going to come? Or are they still calling you on the phone to get information because none of those other things work for them? A really important thing that we often want to know from a survey of passengers is, how satisfied are they with transit services? With your service overall, and with specific aspects of it. How well do the routes work for them? How about the hours? How about the on-time performance? How comfortable the vehicles are? A lot of different aspects of service quality that we might want to ask them about. And then probably a really important thing, if you're doing service planning, to get at is, what types of improvements or changes would enhance their experience? If you were going to change something, what would be the best thing you could do to make riders happy? Now, different riders are going to have different opinions on that, but this is your opportunity to ask the question and find out. Now, you're probably going to want to ask a lot of these questions in your survey, but which specific ones and which specific aspects of them is going to depend on how you're going to use the data. So maybe you're going to use it for service planning, which case it's going to be really important to understand how people use the system and what kind of improvements they want. Maybe you're interested in using it to enhance your marketing channels and messaging. In that case, you want to know maybe why people are using the system and what they like about it, what benefits they feel it delivers to them, because those are going to be the same benefits that may be relevant to new riders. If you're wanting to improve the passenger experience, well, obviously here, we want to know how satisfied they are with various aspects of the service, so we can figure out which aspects aren't working so well and can make them better. You may be making decisions about fares and fare media, in which case it's going to be important to know how often people are riding, how many trips they're making in a day, how they're paying their fare now, how they'd like to pay it. And then finally, and this is kind of a little bit different one, is often we simply want to profile our ridership so that we can demonstrate to community leaders and stakeholders what it is we're doing for the community, what benefits we're delivering. In that case, it's going to be very important to know things like, how many people are using the bus to get to school? How many people are using it to get to jobs or to medical care? And if the transit weren't available, how they would be able to make those trips, if they would be able to make those trips. So those can be really important points in demonstrating the value of transit. So many things we might want to know. But based on the things you want to know, your third decision to make, or second, I think I've lost track, is what population do you want to survey? Do you want to survey all your riders, every single one of them? Or are there specific subgroups? For example, if you want to survey your fixed route passengers, do you want to survey the riders on all routes, or maybe on just particular routes that you're interested in making service changes on? Or maybe you really want to survey riders that are going to a particular destination, like a college, if you're considering making changes to the service that goes to the college, or if you're considering making changes to your weekend service, maybe you really want to survey your weekend riders to see how they feel about the things that you're considering doing. Demand response passengers, maybe you only want to talk with the ADA certified individuals because you have specific things that you want to find out from them. Or maybe you want to survey your general public dial-a-ride users, or some subset. So depending on what decisions you're planning on making and what questions you want to ask is going to determine the population that you want to survey. And once you know that, once you know the kind of questions you want to ask, the population you want to survey, then you can select your research method. So for fixed route passengers, you have a couple of research methods to choose from. Quantitatively, you can survey them on board the bus, do an intercept survey right on the bus where you have a captive audience, or you can conduct an online survey, which you promote on the bus and at transit centers and through social media and other ways, and drive your riders to an online survey platform. I will tell you that if you want a really representative sample of your riders, an onboard survey is probably the best way to get that. An online survey is going to be somewhat more self-selected, and you're not going to have the same kind of control over who responds to your survey. But either of those can give you a lot of information. Qualitatively, maybe the things that you want to ask about aren't easily put into a survey. Maybe you really want to explore what kind of service changes you could make that would make people happier and would make them use transit longer and more often. And maybe you don't have specific things in mind. You really want to explore what riders have to tell you about their service needs. In that case, you might want to recruit focus groups or do informal interviews on board the bus. So again, that decision is going to come out of what you need to know and how you want to use the data. For demand response passengers, there are a couple of different kinds of ways that we can survey them. We can survey them on board the vehicle as you would on fixed route, but with a mailback survey because it's not going to be as easy for them to complete and return the survey on the bus. With an online survey, or even with a phone survey, because with demand response passengers, we obviously kind of have an idea who they are because they're probably registered with us to use the service. But you can also recruit focus groups and do informal interviews with them if there are issues you want to explore that are not easily put into a survey. So your first three steps are determine your objectives, identify your population, and select your research method. Once you have done that, then the steps are going to vary depending on the research method that you've selected. If you've selected a survey, there's going to be one set of steps to follow. If you selected qualitative research, then there'll be a somewhat different set of steps. And so we're going to go through those two individually. And I'm going to begin with the steps that would be involved in a survey. And we're going to begin with questionnaire design, because that would be the first step that you would conduct in doing a survey. So we're back to that what do you want to know thing. And I went over it kind of conceptually before, but this is a very specific list that you might want to go through and think about for a survey. If this is a planning survey, if you are going to be making route changes based on it, you may want origin destination information. You may actually want to ask people where they're coming from, where they're going to, so that you can map those trip patterns and use that to determine what are important connections for your routes to make. You may want to ask about usage characteristics, how often they ride the bus, what routes or services they use. Do they ride on weekdays and or weekends? That can be important because folks that use transit intensively may use it 7 days a week, and that weekend service may be very important to them if they work in a service job that requires weekend shifts. Do they transfer, or do they use a single route? You know, if they're transferring, Transfer coordination becomes an important thing to think about. How are they paying their fare now, and maybe how would they like to pay their fare? So those are all usage characteristics. We talked about information sources, how they're getting information. We talked about customer satisfaction. You probably want to ask about it a number of different ways. Overall, how happy are they with the bus? And how happy are they with specific aspects of service? Routes, schedules, on-time performance, weekends. I could go on and on. I mean, you literally could come up with 10 or 20 or 30 different things. Keep it to a reasonable number. Ask about the things that you really think that you maybe need to address and can do something about. Customer satisfaction also is something you may want to track over time. So you may want to identify a small set of questions that you ask every time you do a passenger survey, so that you can see if problem areas arise or if things are getting better over time. Improvement, and I'm going to show you how to ask these questions on some questionnaires, but improvement priorities, ratings. We can ask people, you know, on a scale of 1 to 10, how important is each of a series of improvements to you personally? Now, what I will tell you is you're going to get a whole lot of 10s, because people that use transit intensively, everything's important to them. So we often finish that list by asking, if you could only have one of these, what would be the most important one to you? And that's where you can begin to really differentiate between different improvements that might be important to people. Motivators. If we want to ask about why people use transit, we can simply ask them a question and give them a checklist of reasons they ride. But we can also ask them about vehicle availability. We can ask them how many vehicles are available in their home versus how many drivers there are in their home. And that will often get at why this particular person is using transit. We can also look at things like age and disability that might impact the reason that they're using transit. And then finally, we of course want to ask some demographic questions so that we can understand demographically who our riders are. And probably the 4 key ones are age, income, disability status, and employment or student status. This is a really, really important one, because it tells us a lot of things. It tells us something about their transportation needs. If they're employed or they're a student, that means they probably have regular commute needs. It tells us about the economic advantage of transit, because if we're getting people to work or school, that's an important thing. So we may want to go beyond just asking them if they're employed or if they're a student, and ask some specifics about their travel, their work schedule, their travel needs related to that, also about what school or college they go to. So writing a questionnaire is something that we could probably spend all day talking about, but I want to give you just a few quick guidelines. The first one is, when you sit down to write a questionnaire, try to arrange the questions in a logical sequence that allows the person to easily flow through the questionnaire. Don't just randomly put questions on a piece of paper based on, you know, how they pop into your head, because that's going to be difficult, you know, for a person to keep going. But if the questions form a logical sequence, you'll help guide them through it. And start with the least personal, easiest questions to begin with. So for example, in this little very small survey that you're looking at on the right, the first one is, on average, how many days per week do you use OmniLink? That's a pretty easy question, not personal, nothing I feel bad about answering, or, you know, don't have to think too hard about it. It's like, oh, on an average, I ride about 5 days a week. I can circle a 5 and I'm ready to go. Sometimes you need to take into account that there's going to be people that this is a harder question for, because they might say, well, I'm riding this week, but most weeks I don't ride at all. And so you might need to give them an option for less frequent. Sometimes we ask this question simply, in the last 7 days, how many days have you ridden on transit? And so if they're only riding today, they would say 1. So there are different ways that you can make the question, ensure that you've offered options that will suit everybody's needs. How long have you been writing OmniLink? Why do you write OmniLink? Now we're beginning to get into a little harder questions here. They have to think about, why did they write? Is it because it's convenient, it's easy to use, they're disabled, it's their only means of transportation, why are they using it? And you can see in this case, it says circle all the reasons that apply, because people may use transit for a multitude of reasons. As you write questions, try to make the questions easy to understand. So try them out on other people. Make sure that you're not using jargon, that you're not using terminology or ways of thinking that are specific to the transit industry. Make sure that your wording is simple. Use simple, clear words, unambiguous language. You don't want people to be able to interpret the question in multiple ways. You want it to have one clear meaning, and only address one issue per question. Don't ask questions that embed a couple of different things, like if we increased weekend service or ran later at night, would you ride more often? Those are two questions. Increase weekend service, run later at night are two different things. Those should be two questions. You wouldn't want to put more than one issue into a single question. Stick with multiple choice questions to the extent possible, particularly if people are filling this out on board a bus. You want them to simply be able to check or circle an answer, not to have to do very much writing. From the point of view of you being able to analyze the data, you'll see later on having multiple choice questions where you can say A, B, C, or D is the answer is going to make your life a whole lot easier and provide you with data that's a lot more useful. Include directions on how to complete and return the questionnaire. So throughout the questionnaire, at the top here, it says, please circle the correct answer for each question. At the bottom, it says, when finished, please return this form to the surveyor. So, let people know exactly what to expect. Whoops. And as I said before, even within the questions, you might want to embed little directions like circle all reasons that apply. Okay, things like that, just to make sure that it's clear to people what they need to do, and so that you get back the cleanest, best data possible. And then finally, once you've written your questions and you've got them in what you think is a logical sequence, pre-test. Try your survey questions out on real people, non-transit people, family members, friends, whoever you can rope into doing it, because they will help you find missing answers, find errors, just show you that things aren't always as clear as you thought they were. So once you have your set of questions, then the next part is to actually produce it into a questionnaire. Now, if we are talking about an onboard questionnaire, something that is going to be self-administered by the passenger on board the bus, there are some things to think about. One is that you want to print it on cardstock, heavy stock that someone can write on with a pen or pencil without having to have a clipboard or a book, because not everybody's going to have a clipboard or a book with them or something to press on. And unless you're going to have a whole lot of clipboards on board the bus, it's just a lot easier to print on cardstock. Make sure that minimal writing is required. As I said, check boxes or answers that people can circle are the best, because writing on board a moving bus, you end up getting a lot of stuff you can't read. Provide a pen or pencil. Not everybody carries one with them, and that can be a factor that keeps people from filling your survey out. So make sure that when they get handed the survey, they're also offered a pen or pencil. And if you have a population that is both English and Spanish speaking, or speaks English and some other language, if there are two dominant languages in your area, a great way to do a bilingual survey is to have it in one language on one side of the cardstock and have it in the other language on the back. That way everybody gets the option of completing it in the language they're most comfortable in. If you have more than two languages, we can talk about some strategies for that in the Q&A, because I have dealt with it many times. Now, an issue that comes up a lot these days is, well, you know, paper seems kind of old-fashioned, and maybe it'd just be a lot easier if we conducted this survey on digital tablets. And that certainly is an option. You can program it in your survey into SurveyMonkey or a dedicated survey program, have it right there on the tablet, and then have the surveyor, we're going to get to talking about surveyors in a minute, either conduct the interview orally and fill it out for the person, or simply hand the tablet to the person and let them fill it out themselves if they're comfortable using the tablet. I will note that while paper surveys are old-fashioned, they generally give you the greatest sample size. They get the greatest participation because they allow people to self-administer. The upside of a tablet is that all the data is nicely data entered and ready to go as soon as you complete the survey. That's a very cool thing. The downside is that you probably only are going to have so many tablets on a bus, and so only 1 or 2 people can do the survey at a time. If you're having the surveyor do it orally, some people are not comfortable with that. They're not comfortable with answering questions out loud where other people can hear. And so in general, it limits the sample size and it may introduce some bias. So the simplest way to do an onboard survey is still to do it with pencil and paper. Okay, so this is an example of a questionnaire from a small rural system that's probably very much like the ones that you guys operate. And I'm just going to kind of walk you through how it was organized and the types of questions that were in it. So in the past 7 days, how many days have you ridden Calaveras Transit? Straightforward, gets at frequency, gives them the option of this is my first time riding. Where did you begin this one-way trip? And where is your final destination? Here they are getting some origin destination information, not at the street corner level, but at the community level, because the routes that they operate are primarily inter-community routes. They go between towns, and so people can choose, you know, I started in Angels Camp and I'm going to end up in Jackson. And that gives the planners a lot of information about trip patterns. Will you use transportation services other than Calaveras Transit to complete this trip? So they're trying to get at, are they going to transfer when they get to these outlying communities to transit service for the neighboring counties, which they connect to? Did you board today in a wheelchair or bring a bicycle on the bus? Getting at vehicle needs and how they're using the vehicles. What is the main purpose of this trip today? This is a really important question that we often really want to understand in order to demonstrate how people are using service and how it's benefiting the community. Work, shopping, social service appointments, school or college, medical appointments, recreation. Those are kind of the basics. You may have others in your community. How'd you pay your fare? Did you qualify for a discounted bus fare due to age or disability? How do you get the information? How do you get information about Calaveras Transit? I've talked a number of times about asking people how they get information, and you can see some of the options here: website, printed guide, at the bus stop, from their school or college, on the phone, from the bus operator, from a family or friend or social service agency. So really letting them check as many of these as apply gives you a lot of information about how they are getting their information. Please check all of these that describe you. And this is another question that is getting at this same issue. I access the internet regularly. This will tell you whether a website is a good way to reach them. I have a cell phone. I have a smartphone with internet access. I have an email address. I have a credit or debit card. All of these are things that can help us understand how useful different information tools would be to these people. Google Maps, token transit to pay their fare, how important a website is, or if they don't have any of these things, then, you know, printed guides and information at the bus stop are really critical. Here we get into service rating questions. Please rate your experience with Calaveras Transit during the past 60 days. during the past 60 days. This puts a time limit on what we're asking them. If you just ask an open-ended question, people may go back and think about something that happened 5 years ago, and I still am mad at you about that. Putting it in the past 60 days makes them think about recent history. And this gets into things like courtesy of the bus drivers, how often your bus is on time, comfort of the vehicle, so on, the typical kinds of things that we use to rate the quality of service. And you can see on each of these, they have the option of rating it from 1 to 5, from poor to excellent. And we clearly show them up here what 1 means and what 5 means, with little happy faces and smiley and frowny faces. This particular questionnaire was only in English, and so it was a 2-sided letter size questionnaire. So you flip over to the back, and then we start to get into demographic questions. Where do you live? What best describes you? Employed full-time, employed part-time, retired? Are you a student? Yes or no? And if you're a student, where do you go to school? You'll note we've asked these as 2 separate questions, not combining it into one question. Are you employed or a student? The reason is because many people are both employed and a student, and sometimes you lose that information if you combine them. And so by asking 2 questions later on in the data analysis, you can then combine the people who are employed and a student and the people who are not employed and a student, and you'll know both things. How old are you? What is your approximate household income? Which do you consider yourself? Ethnicity? Do you have a valid driver's license? And was a vehicle available for you to use to make this trip today? This really begins to get at how people are relying on public transit. And then this final set of questions, because this was a questionnaire that was going to guide a planning process, related to how important would each of the following improvements be to a person? And you can see here that, again, they can rate from 1, not important, to 5, very important. Things like operate the bus on Saturdays, provide buses with more seating capacity, provide service to Sutter Creek to connect with Amador Transit to Sacramento, and on, asking about various service improvements that this particular planner had identified as being potentially important to customers. This was based on talking with riders, looking at the system, a lot of things. This list would likely be very different if you were doing a survey, because different improvements would be important in your system. But the key thing is we're asking them for each of the improvements to rate how important it is to them personally, to them, the rider personally. And then, as I said before, when we get down here to 22, we ask which one improvement listed above would be most important to you. This is where we can really begin to get some differentiation and see, if everybody says that F is the most important, then we know that's where we really need to put some attention. And then we do give people 1 chance at the bottom of the survey to have an open-ended question to ask if there's another improvement that would be most important to them. So that was as I said, English only questionnaire with questions on the front and the back. This is a questionnaire formatted on legal size, where all of the questions are arranged on one side of the form, and then the back is Spanish. So we've got English on one side and Spanish on the other. And if you have a large Spanish speaking or other speaking population, non-English speaking population, this is really by far the easiest way to do a survey without having to say, well, what language do you speak? Even if the surveyor can't communicate with the person, if they sense that they speak Spanish, they can simply turn the questionnaire over and make sure that they see it's available in Spanish. Okay, so that was the really quick version of how to develop a questionnaire. Once you have your questionnaire developed, the next thing you need to think about is sampling. And what sampling means is, how do you determine which people to give that questionnaire to, and how do you get them to complete it? And if we are talking about an onboard survey here, now I'm talking about an onboard survey. So surveying your passengers on board the bus, primarily this would be for fixed route buses. You would want to select a sample of trips or runs, the term we use, driver runs. So, a driver's piece of work, trips or runs that cover all routes, days of the week, and day parts. Because what you're trying to do is to make sure that every passenger in your system has an opportunity to complete the questionnaire. And so you would either survey on board every single bus over the course of a week, or you would simply select a sampling of trips or runs on which to survey. When on the bus, when you have a surveyor on the bus, it's really important that they ask every single rider above whatever your specified age limit is, often 12, that they ask every rider to complete the survey. It's important not to sample on the bus, not to just pick, some people, because that really introduces bias. Because no matter how hard we try not to, we're all going to talk to the people that are easier to talk to. So when I train people, surveyors on board buses, to conduct an onboard survey, the key is they have to talk to every single person who gets on the bus and ask them to complete the questionnaire. Surveying, sometimes systems will say, well, why don't we just survey at the transit center? That'd be a lot easier. We can station our surveyors there. And that is one way to go about it, but you will only capture riders who travel through that transit center and have some reason to be off the bus in that transit center. And that's not necessarily going to be representative of your overall ridership. That's going to introduce bias to your sample. So just some concepts that if you're doing a survey that you're probably going to hear at some time, often you will see the term margin of error. And you'll see something that the margin of error should be plus or minus 5% at the 95% confidence level. And a lot of times I see this put into requests for proposals for surveys, and it's pretty clear that whoever wrote it had no idea what it meant. But what it means is that if you are conducting a random sample of a population, you're randomly choosing people from a population, statistics say that based on the number of people you choose, the sample size, you're going to have a specific margin of error. And what that means is that if you are surveying within a population that's got more than 5,000 people in it, and you conduct a survey of 384 of those people, randomly chosen, truly randomly chosen, that your margin of error will be plus or minus 5%. That means that whatever statistic you come up with, so if you're asking people what gender they are, male or female, and 30% are male and 70% are female, that you will know that within 95% of the time, that answer is going to be correct within plus or minus 5%. Okay. Don't worry too much about margin of error when you're conducting an onboard survey, because margins of error are a lot less relevant in this situation for a number of reasons. One, we are not really conducting a random survey. We are not randomly choosing people. We're doing what's called a stratified cluster sample. We are selecting buses and then surveying everybody on board the bus. The other thing is that our population is small. The people that ride our bus is probably a relatively small number of people. It's not going to be 10 or 100,000. It's maybe going to be 1,000 or even 500. And it's likely that we are going to talk to a significant portion of those people. We are going to survey a relatively large proportion of them if we do a good onboard survey. And so calculation of margin of error just becomes a lot less relevant. What's more important to the accuracy of your sample, to getting good data, is ensuring that you survey on a cross-section of routes and buses, that you really do make sure that you cover all day parts, all routes, all days of the week. You spread it out through weekdays and weekends. and that you maximize participation of riders on the bus, that, you don't just, you've got 20 people on the bus and you're happy if you get 2 of them. That's not good. You want to get as many of those 20 people as possible, because that's what's going to give you a good representative sample. Getting off the bus now and thinking about if we were conducting a survey of demand response riders, okay? We might not want to survey them on the bus. We might actually want to survey them by phone, because we know who they are. We know how to get hold of them. Many of them are probably, if this is an ADA certified sample, many of them may be elderly, many of them may have disabilities that limit, their movement when they're on the vehicle. And so just talking to them on the phone might be easier. So the way to sample in that case would be to take your list of registered or recent riders, so you've got a list of riders, you've got phone numbers for them, and then to randomly, and you can use a random number generator in Excel to do this, randomly select the number of people that you want to survey. So if you've got a list of 200 people and you've got time to conduct 50 surveys, then select 50 people from that list. And I would begin by sending them an introductory postcard or email to let them know that you'll be calling them, because otherwise people are going to screen you out and they're simply not going to answer their phone. So let them know that you're going to be calling, and then we'll talk about data collection. Okay, so that was sampling. Sampling kind of leads straight into data collection. So the sampling is figuring out who and you're going to talk to. Data collection is actually talking to them or surveying them, getting the information. And again, I'm going to start with on board the bus. When you're on board the bus, one of the great things about surveying transit passengers is they're a captive audience. They are there at least for, so many minutes. And it's already 11:50. Oh, I really got behind. They're there for a while. So, you have the opportunity to talk with them. I highly recommend, if you're going to be conducting an onboard survey, not just leave it to your drivers to hand out the survey. Drivers have a lot to do. They're going to give the effort very limited attention, because they have many more important things to do, like not running over people and not missing passengers. So it's really useful to have dedicated surveyors ride that sample of buses that you've identified to conduct the survey. And when I say dedicated surveyors, they're people that you've taken a little time to train in how to do this, and you've given them some tools to work with. So one of those tools would be something that clearly identifies them as a surveyor, so that when they approach people, people are comfortable with it. So I always have them wear this little smock that says Transit Survey Team. Before they even open their mouth, people know why they're coming up to them. I encourage them to offer the survey to every single passenger, and to really encourage people to fill it out, not just say, do you want to do a survey? Nobody's going to say yes to that question, but rather to say something like, hi, we're conducting a survey to see how we can improve our transit service. Would you please fill this out and give it back to me before you get off the bus? I always tell them to take the attitude that they're like the nurse at the doctor's office who hands you a clipboard and asks you to fill out those questions. They don't ask you if you want to, they simply assume that you're going to. And that's the attitude that we want to take. We want to be really friendly and nice, but with the assumption that people want to do this because they want better transit service. As I said before, multilingual questionnaire. If you have a large population that doesn't speak English, make sure you give them pens and pencils, and train the surveyors to offer assistance if people are having problems with the questionnaire. Make sure they understand the questionnaire so that they can answer questions, or if someone is not able to fill it out themselves, that they can actually sit down and help them do it. Now, I said that another way to conduct a survey of riders would be online. And This can be a really easy and effective tool. Things like SurveyMonkey or similar programs allow you to program a questionnaire and then simply create a link that people can use to access that questionnaire, a link or a QR code. There are a number of ways you can recruit people to participate in your online survey. Usually the ones that I find are really effective are onboard posters or handouts with a QR code right on it so that they can just click on it with their phone and fill it out while they're on the bus. Putting up displays at bus stops or transfer centers can have the same impact. If you use social media to communicate with your riders, you can send out a social media post with a link to the survey and encourage your riders to take it from there. And then of course you can also put a link on your website or homepage. All of these can be ways that you let your passengers know, hey, we're doing a survey of our passengers. Please fill it out. As I said before, you're not going to get the same kind of representative sample that you would get on the bus, but you can still get a lot of good information from riders. If you want to get good participation, it really helps to offer some kind of incentive. Often we tell people that they'll be entered in a drawing for free gift cards. We'll give away 3 or 4 $50 or $100 gift cards, and that encourages people to participate. You can also tell them that if they participate in some way, you'll deliver to them a free ride. Maybe something on their phone they can show the driver to get a free ride the next day. But some kind of little incentive to encourage people to take the time to fill it out. And this is just an example of a poster that was used in Monterey Salinas Transit to encourage people to take a little 3-minute survey. And you can see right here, it says enter a drawing for $100 gift cards and sign up for paid focus groups, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. And then there was a QR code right there that they could go right to it. Data collection for demand response services. I said that you can do the data collection on the bus, very much like you would an onboard, with the exception that you're not going to put surveyors on board demand response vehicles because often you only have 1 or 2 people on there and that would be prohibitively expensive. But what you can do is have the drivers hand out the questionnaires to the riders and then give them a business reply mail back envelope so that they can take it home, fill it out, and mail it back. The reason that we usually do this is it's more difficult for many demand response riders to fill out the survey on board the bus, and they may be reticent to just leave it with the driver because they may have made comments about driver courtesy or something like that. So we generally try to give them a different way of returning the questionnaire. And then of course we also talked about the potential for phoning those individuals, notifying them up front with a postcard, and then calling to schedule or conduct the interview. If you don't get people the first time, it is very important to make callbacks at various times of day until you get them. If you just call once and say, oh, they didn't answer, not going to talk to them, you're going to get a very skewed sample because you're only going to get the people that are home all the time. So you definitely want to do callbacks to maximize your sample. And this is just a little tip that if you are doing demand response survey or a phone survey, is to set that survey up in SurveyMonkey or a similar platform because it makes it really easy to do the data entry as you ask the questions. Okay, and then we are at the final item, which is analyze data and interpret findings. This is where we get the fun stuff, but this is also sometimes the hardest part because we really have to think here. And the first thing is if you've done an onboard survey, if you've collected data on paper, you now have 100 or 200 or 500 pieces of paper with information on them, and you need to get them into a form that you can analyze. And that means that some kind of data entry, you need to get them into a way that you can run frequencies and run crosstabs. And the most common way to do that is to set up a data file in Excel or some other spreadsheet program. And if you do that, it's really important to think about how you lay your record out. There needs to be a unique identifier for each respondent in case you need to go back and look at a questionnaire, you need to identify the route on which it was collected if you are going to try and weight your data based on ridership. And then there needs to be a specific column for each question and a standard form for each variable. So this is an example of a data file from a rural system. And you can see here where it says color. In this case, these surveys were color coded based on the route they were handed out on. And so that identified the route. Over here, you can see question 1 was probably something about how often do you ride? And the answers were A, B, or C, and those are filled in here. So very simple way of filling in the data, something that can be easily calculated and analyzed later on. Another tip is SurveyMonkey can also be handy here if you have a relatively small number of questionnaires and don't want to deal with record files and all. You can simply set up your onboard survey, set up all the questions in SurveyMonkey, and then enter the data manually, and then it will allow you to run frequencies and crosstabs. So it can be a very easy analysis tool. It does require a paid subscription for SurveyMonkey to do the manual data entry. It's about $300 a year. Okay, so once you get to doing data analysis, there are a couple of concepts that you need to understand. The first is just basic frequencies. Frequencies are the basic distribution of how respondents answer a question. And a frequency table, like the one you see here, might include the number of people who gave each answer and the percent that represented. So, 36% said cash, and that was 23.7% of all the respondents. And valid percent means it was 24.2% of the respondents who actually answered the question, because we see down here there were 3 people that just didn't answer the question. And so that is what a frequency is. When we say X% said this and Y% said that, that is a frequency. Frequencies, any kind of data is better shown in charts, easier to understand. And pie charts are a really traditional way of illustrating frequencies. So you can see here, this is the fair medium used. Pie chart lets you see at a glance that most people are paying cash in this particular system, and much smaller numbers are using other ways. Frequencies can also be displayed on bar charts like this one. So you can see that this is the percent of the ridership that fell into each of these age categories. And here the researcher has grouped them into young people, middle-aged working people, and older people to kind of show the life cycle of transit ridership. Now you can also look at multiple variables together. So this is a chart which shows how people rated various aspects of service, frequency of weekday service, how late buses operate, and so on. And that's a lot to look at, because you're going, okay, how many people said this was poor and how many people said this was excellent? A lot easier to put that on a chart and look at it, and relatively easy to do. So this chart demonstrates what that last table showed, which is the percent of people who gave each of the ratings to each of the different factors. So frequencies are kind of the most basic research analysis tool. The other most basic one, and probably really most powerful, is crosstabs. And crosstabs allow you to compare how 2 or more segments within the population answered a question. So for example, if you knew that how often people rode, and you compared that to how they rated service, that would give you a valuable piece of information. So it lets you compare behaviors and desires of various ridership segments. So you can compare frequent riders versus occasional riders. Do they think differently? Do they view you differently? Commuters versus non-commuters. Obviously, they probably have very different characteristics in how they use the service. Age segments. Why do young people use the service versus why do older people use it? Riders on different routes or services. Crosstabs can be a really, really powerful tool. And this is just a really simple example of a crosstab, is crosstabbing the number of days per week that people ride by their age groups. And the way you would read this crosstab table is that among people who ride 1 to 4 days a week, and the reason you know this is the way you want to read it is because it's 100% down here for this column. Among people who ride 1 to 4 days a week, 23% are between 16 and 24 years old, okay? As opposed to among people who ride 1 to 4%, 32% are 55 years or older. So that's the way you would read a crosstab table. And occasionally you will see that crosstab tables total to more than 100% or less than 100%. And that is simply rounding error, because these percentages are simply rounded from 23.675, and occasionally you end up with an extra percent at the bottom. Crosstabs can be shown on charts as well. This is the crosstab we were just looking at, displayed on a chart. So you can see among those people who ride 1 to 4 days a week, if you looked at all of them, it's 100%, but these are the shares based on the different age groups. Another way you can use crosstabs is to look at things like, this is people that are employed and work weekends. So that was actually a combination of 2 questions, versus people that are employed but do not work weekends, and then people that are not employed, looking at how they rated a specific aspect of service, in this case, Saturday service. So that's a really powerful use of crosstabs, is to determine, among people that it really matters to, people who are employed and work weekends, how do they feel about Saturday service? Because that's going to be more relevant than it is among people that aren't really, or don't really have a need for the service to get to work. Frequencies and crosstabs can be calculated directly in Excel or Access if you use Access. Excel can also be used to create the charts. Crosstabs and other forms of analysis can be done much more easily in SPSS or PSPP, which is a free alternative, which is what market researchers use. And so this may be an area where it's really worthwhile to get a little bit of help with your data analysis, either from a market researcher, or even if there's a market research class at your local community college, they might be able to help you with that. And then also, SurveyMonkey can be used to create frequency tables and charts and simple crosstabs. So that's another resource. If you get your data into SurveyMonkey, then it can kind of make some of these things easier for you without you having to understand quite so much. I've got a little tutorial here on calculating frequencies and crosstabs, which I am going to skip, but we can come back to it in the questions if it is something that you guys are really interested in. It's probably more nerdy than most of you ever wanted to hear about. And then I'm going to talk briefly about focus groups, and we are running a little long, so I apologize for that, but I will push through. Focus groups are really useful when the questions that you want to ask are hard to fit into a multiple choice question. You can understand how riders think about public transit. You can use them to explore issues that aren't well defined, to get feedback on service plans or passenger information tools, so you can actually give people a chance to look at maps and things and tell you what they think. And you can explore the needs and concerns of specific segments. So you could do a focus group of students, of seniors, of commuters, and really understand, how well you're serving them and what kind of things are important to them. In terms of recruiting focus groups, getting people together to talk to, we can use a lot of the same tools that we talked about using to get people to an online survey. Posters on the buses or at transit centers with a QR code or a web link so that people can sign up. You can have links on your website or in social media that people can use to sign up. And you can actually just do a little intercept survey on the bus or at transit centers, asking people if they'd be willing to participate in a focus group. I usually recommend doing a little mini survey at the time you do recruitment, so you know a little bit about the riders, because that will allow you to select people for your group that represent a cross section of whatever group of riders you want to learn about. And you definitely need an incentive to drive participation. Generally, a drawing to get people to sign up, but then if they actually come to the focus group, whether it's online or in person, generally you offer them a gift for doing that. And that might be a free ride pass, it might be a gift card, something of that sort. But people need to be paid for their time. We're asking them to commit their time. Focus groups can be conducted in person, as I said, and if you do them in person, I highly recommend a public facility where people are going to feel comfortable, like a library conference room. Or they can be conducted via Zoom, as I said before, because most of our riders are now Zoom literate. This really reduces barriers to getting people to participate, particularly if travel is a limitation for them or they have a disability that makes it hard to travel. Being able to participate right on their computer can make it really easy and can give you a lot of information. Moderating focus groups. The first thing is to create a detailed discussion outline for yourself, something that really guides you through what you want to know, follow-up questions you want to ask, all of that. But don't be afraid to wander from that discussion outline, because that's really the value of a focus group. This is a discussion. Start with easy items again, and move to more substantive issues. Start by letting people introduce themselves and just tell you how they use transit. Allow riders to talk about what they think is important, things that they care about or are concerned with, and then bring them back to your main focus. But give them a chance to say what they want to say. If you're asking specific questions and you want to avoid groupthink, everybody going, oh yeah, I think the same thing, let people write their answers down first, a quick answer, and then have them turn over the piece of paper and talk about why they gave a specific answer. Use visuals to explain concepts or service plans that you want feedback on. So, you can use PowerPoint to, show people things that you want them to look at and say, this is good, bad, or indifferent. Follow up on unexpected responses. This is the real value in a focus group. Somebody might say something you didn't expect them to say. Why? Why is that the answer you gave? That's something you can't do in a survey. And ensure that everyone is heard. If one participant is dominating, just politely thank them for their views and say that you want to hear from others as well. And then finally, don't be defensive. You've asked for their experiences and opinions. Listen to them. You may not agree with what they're saying. You may know that what they're saying is not necessarily true based on your experience, but let people have their say. And then at the end of the group, you can bring up other things that they might not be aware of, but do not get defensive. In addition to focus groups, you can do these same kind of interviews individually at the bus stop or at a transit center. This is not a scientific survey, but it is a great way to get to know your ridership. Just go ride the bus, sit down next to people and say, hi, I'm Selena. Can I ask you a couple questions? And just get them talking. You will learn a lot. So in summary, conduct market research to understand your riders, to inform planning and service, to improve your passenger information, to build customer satisfaction, and to identify opportunities to attract new riders. Remember, we've got quantitative and qualitative research methods to work with. Think about what'll work best for you. And then be sure to consider each of the steps in the process to ensure that you end up with the information that you need to make good decisions. So I'm 11 minutes over. Sorry about that, Liz. A lot of information to convey today, but hopefully I've brought up some questions in your mind, and I'm going to turn it back to Liz.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Selena. It's, we could just listen to you talk about this stuff almost all day, but hopefully everyone, something sparked in you and you can share your questions. So I'm going to allow you to unmute yourselves. So you should be able to raise your hand in the reactions, or you can unmute yourself and ask your question, or you can put it into the chat. And we'll record this and then we'll stop when we get into the workshop part. But did want to mention there's a couple of things put into the chat. One is that apron for the person facilitating the survey on board. Is there a place to buy that, or should you have should an agency have that made or something?
You would have to have that made. I had those made. They're called cobbler's aprons. You can buy them from, like a specialty company and just have them put whatever you want. Some systems use t-shirts. That's probably cheaper. We used aprons because we're going to reuse them over and over again. But, even just a t-shirt can work.
Okay, great. Then another suggestion or mentioning was Survey Planet, another survey platform. So I'm sure there are lots of other platforms out there. So yeah, but those are another good suggestion.
Absolutely. And many of them offer either free versions or at least free trial subscriptions. So you can try them out and see if you think they're going to work for your system before you spend any money on them.
Right. Okay, great. I had a question, and maybe you mentioned this at the very beginning and I wasn't paying attention, but how often, doing these types of surveys, it takes a lot of work, and obviously it would be important to do if you're considering a change or, you haven't done it in a while, but is there any kind of frequency that agencies should, put on their kind of annual calendar to do it regularly, or is there a frequency you suggest?
Many systems that I work with try to do a survey once a year. And that's probably a really good frequency. Even if you only do it every other year, it's better than not doing it at all. But if you can manage it once a year, that's terrific. And pick a season when your ridership is highest and sort of most typical. So like in the fall is generally a time when many transit systems try to do their onboard surveys.
Okay, thanks. Does anybody else have a question? Otherwise, we can get into the workshop and you can feel free to put into the chat or raise your hand if you, here's a question, but I'll finish that thought. If you wanted to learn more, see the tutorial about the cross tabulation and the frequencies for the survey analysis, let us know. Kathy, did you want to unmute and ask a question?
Sure, if I can find the unmute button.
You found it.
Get my mouse to go to the right place. Thank you. You mentioned, thank you, that all of this was very informative. And you mentioned specifically to make sure that you survey all the riders on a bus. Considering the buses are constantly starting and stopping, do you have a strategy to make sure that that is actually possible?
Generally, the way we train surveyors is to, as soon as someone boards and sits down, to approach them and ask them to complete the survey. So that's their way of keeping track that they asked everybody, is they're simply always doing the person that just got on the bus. Generally, if your survey is not too long, people can usually complete it and give it back to the surveyor before they get off the bus. We often have a fallback that if someone takes it with them because they were making a very short trip, that they can give it to any bus driver, and that the bus drivers will turn it in at the end of their shift and it'll get added back into the equation. Does that answer your question? There's also the issue of what we call, non-response, people that simply don't want to participate for one reason or another. Sometimes that is simply because their go-to reaction is to say no. The first thing that they do when a surveyor approaches them is, no, I don't want to do that. And I've had a lot of really great surveyors over the years that have had different strategies for dealing with that. One is just a huge smile. Is just really be friendly and nice and energetic, because it's really hard to be rude to someone who's smiling at you with a big smile. The other one they say is that if you can get them to touch the questionnaire, you're holding them out to them, if you can get them to touch it, they'll almost surely take it. So there are just kind of little tricks like that of mostly just being as engaging as possible. And so, either hiring people that have good customer service skills, or using your internal staff and giving them some training. I think that doing a survey is an incredible learning experience for transit staff.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Kathy, for your question. Great. Does anyone else have a question?
I mean, I know that this is not as fun a topic as some of the marketing topics we've talked about. I don't have as many pictures. There were a lot more words, but it is such an important tool for transit agencies to use. It is so important to understand our riders.
I have a question. How do you know when you've collected enough responses?
That's a really good question. Generally, if we have identified, a cross section of trips, so a lot of times they're driver runs. So we'll, let's say you have 50 driver runs and we decided we were going to survey on half of them. So we've selected half of them. We keep surveying until we've covered all of those runs. Now you might get a really, you might have a whole lot of people completed early on. You go, oh, well, we probably have enough, but you maybe haven't done the weekends yet, or you haven't done certain routes. And so it's important to complete whatever sample you set out to do.
Okay, that makes sense. All right, well, if there aren't any other questions, why don't we move forward, but feel free to jump in at any time if something comes up. But let's see if anybody wants to share examples for the kind of more participant engagement. So I'm going to stop the recording